I'm James, I've just turned 30, I live in Cambridge and I own an E34 UK limited edition M5.
The mirror, you feel somebody else. All the times you had to say, no one else feels themselves. Can't believe you held yourself accountable for you and me. Not the way we do things here. Anybody else can see that.
This is a BMW E34 M5, 1995, 3.86 speed. It's one of the last 50 produced or special ordered by BMW UK. They simply called it the UK limited edition. It's number 35. Sorry, no, it's not. It's number 39 out of 50. They made 35 in this colour, Orinoco metallic, and they made 15 in Rosso red, which is the one I would have chosen, given the choice. So the Orinoco cars had a petrol and mint extended leather. They called it petrol and mint. It's sort of various shades of green. The Rosso cars, I believe they called it champagne. Lovely sort of light beige sort of colour. Really nice.
If you had had the choice when it was new, would you have bought this combo, or would you have gone for the other combo?
I prefer the paint on this, but I prefer the interior of the other one. And because you know me, I like the interior is the thing for me. I would have had the Rosso. I went to look at two. This was the second one. There was an Avis car with black leather, so a non-limited edition, but it was just shoddy. So I just...
Okay, so how many cars did you go and look at?
Two. Yeah, just the two. Yeah, there's kind of a very limited amount of cars to go and look at. You know, you have to just, you know, to an extent buy what's available. The limited editions, I believe they all came with, so the individual paint and leather. They all came with sunroof, electric seats, air conditioning, and then I believe headlamp washers. I'm not 100% sure on that. The only thing this car has got, which I think was an additional option, is Servotronic steering, which I've been told out of the 50 limited editions, there's, I don't know how true this is, never looked at it, there's only about 4 or 5 that have got that. So, but then a lot of people say the Servotronics are not great anyway, so they prefer it without.
Okay, so is the car modified, or is it standard? Are there any modifications on it?
It's pretty standard. The only sort of major modification I would say is the exhaust. The reason being the previous owner, there's something in the service history about it, about the cat sort of being broke up and just the whole exhaust being in terrible condition. So we had a Hayward and Scott system made up from the manifold back, so cats and 4 silencers or 2 silencers, however many it is. But so apart, yeah, so it's the exhaust really is the only mod. And then in terms of small things I've done whilst I've been doing the refresh on it, things like braided brake hoses and the odd poly bush here and there. Apart from that, it's standard. I'm the 5th owner of the car, so I bought it in April or March 2016, I think it was. The guy prior to me that owned it, he had it not too long, I think 3 or 4 years. But he was big on cars. There's, you know, some stuff in the service history about storage for various expensive, really high-end cars at DK Engineering, and that's one of them. Not that that's high-end, but... So yeah, he had it for 4 or 5 years, at which point I think it had quite a bit of fabrication underneath, sort of seals welded, some stuff on the rear arches, inner arches. And the whole thing was painted. It's had elements of the interior dyed. So that's the point at which most of the service history starts, I think from about 2008 onwards. Prior to that, there's not really a lot of info that I've got on it, just a stamped up book, and then there's various things I've found. Most of its life was spent down in Surrey, I think for the first 2 owners, and then I think the third bloke that bought it lived up in Scotland. So I think there's a service up in Scotland, and someone on a forum somewhere mentioned to me that they remember seeing it for sale up in Scotland before the 4th guy had it, so the guy before me. So most of the time it's been sort of South England, and then it was in Scotland for a bit prior, but yeah, not an enormous amount I know apart from that.
Okay, so can you tell us about where the the M5 sits in the market for those who might not know about this car? So not particularly your individual car,
Just in
but the M5, what were its rivals? Where did it sit in the market? How much money would it have cost you back then?
The M5 has always, well, the M cars in general have always been BMW's sort of, high-end performance variants. BMW pride themselves on being the ultimate driving machine, and they really have made a great mixture of performance-orientated luxury saloons and coupes over the years. So the M5 has always been, until the M8 came along, I suppose, most recently, has always been the most powerful, sort of fastest super saloon that BMW have produced. So at the time, this one, I mean, the E34 shape was launched in 1988, I believe, with the M5. It was a 3.6 then, but I think rivals would have been things such as the Mercedes E500 or 500e. I suppose the Audi S2 maybe, or RS2, the Nogaro blue one. I think it was an RS2, wasn't it? The Lotus Carlton, I suppose, the Vauxhall Lotus Carlton was a big rival at that point, but then I suppose the Carlton was more aimed towards the Alpina version of the E34. Of course, yeah, you had the Jaguar XJR at that point. I suppose, yeah, they did an XJR in the XJ40, but I don't think it was taken too seriously. I think the XJRs were taken a lot more seriously when they launched the X300 shape, which had I think it was a 3.2 straight six supercharged engine, same as the DB7. That was like 330 horsepower, so it was very similar to this. Although that was a slush box auto. No, I think you could get it in manual, but I think most people went for the slush box. So yeah, XJR as well.
Yeah, but very much a different MO in that, with the automatic option and probably softer suspension. It was more of a Grand Tourer. This is definitely more performance focused.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'd say the Mercedes as well, being an auto, and the Jags kind of path they wanted to go down was more a general sort of super fast barge, whereas the M cars had always been supposed to have been more nimble, more about handling, more about driver response, weight balance, engagement. Yeah, more of a ultimate driving machine. Yeah.
Which particular external design features really appeal to you?
Really, it's the side profile's the thing that drew me to the E34. I should have brought it along, but when I was a kid, I had a book that I've still got. And flicking through the pages, it comes to the E34 M5, and it's a late six-speed Avis car. And it's a press car that is still about, I think the number plate's M108 something. But the car is still alive and going. And there's like a side shot of it, a moving shot where all the background is blurred, but the car's in focus. And it's that side profile that I love. I think it's kind of boxy, I like a slightly boxy design. And I like a bizarre, but I love a decent rear overhang on a car. I think these they've got a chunky rear overhang.
So you'd say that the proportions of the E34 M5 are pretty much what
I like, yeah. Yes. The only thing this car is missing that I think is cherry on the cake is a rear spoiler. I think that just finishes it off nicely, but really it's the shape that, yeah.
Which aesthetics of the cabin do you like the best?
The instrument binnacle, classic, clear, BMW. All the dials you need, nothing else. I think that's the main thing. When you sit in it, it's the first thing you notice when you're in the cockpit. You think, oh, yeah, that looks cool. I like how everything's sort of, all BMs, everything's angled towards the driver, everything's in place. The front seats are lovely, really comfortable. They've got so much support in them. A lot of adjustment when all the electrics work, which they don't, but something else to fix.
Okay, so are there any bits inside the cabin that you change? Yeah,
I like how everything on the dash is angled towards you, but I think they could have done something better with the centre console. It's a little bit too blocky for my liking and a bit too, not utilitarian, but I don't think it's pretty. It got to a point where, aesthetically it looked great. It'd been repainted, it looked good, but underneath, even though it'd been maintained throughout its life, there's some big bills for some mechanical work in the history, and even though it had been maintained throughout its life, a lot of parts under there were still original. So anyone that owns one of these cars knows that all the fuel lines, brake lines, suspension fluid lines, everything just rots eventually. And it was just looking quite tired under there. Everything was a bit corroded, so I thought, no, now is the time to take it off the road before it gets beyond, before it gets much worse, that it'll be more of a problem to deal with. So that's the point at which I thought, you know what, I'll do this, this and this, and then me being me, you remove one thing and you think, oh, I've got to restore that. I don't want an immaculate painted line going under a corroded exhaust shield or something.
You're saying this might have escalated somewhat?
It's escalated a hell of a lot. Yeah.
So can you tell, what have you restored so far?
So it's kind of been done into the rest of sort of, I like to call it a refresh, if you like, because I don't consider myself a professional by any means. So the refresh started a while ago when I was living with my parents on their drive, and I started doing kind of anything from, the mid backwards was what I started on, because that was the stuff under the back, all the SLS, the self-leveling suspension stuff that was all corroding and etc. So I pulled all of that off. The first job really was to get the car in up on axle stands at a point where I could leave it for months on end. And luckily, because all the rear sills and jacking points, I think, have all been welded up and sorted, it was solid, so I could support it on the original jacking points, which, again, any E34 owner knows that's pretty risky. But, so yeah, pulled the subframe off to start with, so suspension, diff, drive shafts, exhaust. Took the subframe off as a complete unit with the brakes still on it, and all the arms in place. Put that to one side and then just gradually pulled everything else off. So fuel tank, got the wiring harness out of the way, and then started on the plumbing, which was, the thing I wanted to get sorted. The most difficult thing I had to deal with, which turned out not to be too difficult in the end, but the thing I thought was going to be most of a pain was the self-leveling valve on the back. So there's a valve with an inlet and an outlet, fluid goes in and returns back to the tank in the front. And then there's a little arm on it that attaches to the anti-roll bar. So depending on where the roll bar is, it'll move the arm up and down, and then fluid is pumped through to the rear struts to level the car. Anyway, that thing looked completely knackered. Like, the unions were so corroded, they looked like they'd been welded because it was just so corroded. I thought that was going to be a real struggle because that part's no longer available. If you can find a good one, they're real good money, but then finding a good one's difficult in the first place because they're all in that condition. So anyway, I sent it off to 3 different people, managed to get it sorted in the end. I won't name names because someone caused me a hell of a lot of trouble, charged me money, and it was a nightmare. So I managed to get the money back. Then I sent it to Mr. Olias, everyone knows who he is, to rebuild it, reseal it. And then where the original machine shop had drilled out one of the unions, it wasn't fitting in the bottom, so I sent it to Steve, and he kindly drilled a new seat in the bottom of it, and seems okay so far. So that was the most difficult thing, really. In terms of sourcing parts and stuff, BMW still really support this model. There are various annoying things you can't get hold of, but overall it looks a big task when you lay it out and you think,
The shock absorbers on these are quite special?
Yes. As far as I'm aware. Now, there's an interesting story with this car, in that I've been told this car, I've got a receipt for it, had the very last set of EDC E34 M5 dampers available from Germany put on this car in 2012, I think it was, by CPC Engineering. There's no others available. When I got it, one had a bit of a leak, and I thought, Christ, what am I going to do? There's a place in Poland called Nargengast who do all sorts of damper refurbishments and that sort of thing, but they're very well known for doing E34s, E31s. So yeah, they're very difficult to get hold of, very expensive to buy second hand, but they can be refurbished for a fairly reasonable price.
And would you say that when it's all working and you press that button that you can tell the difference?
No. No. When I bought the car, I wasn't convinced it was working properly anyway, but I got no warnings on the dash. A friend of mine, Claire, and Ian have got, live very locally to me. They happen to have a 6-speed, and he's had the same sort of trouble trying to get his to work. As far as I'm aware, there's no warnings on the dashboard at the point I was driving it, but I just couldn't tell the difference. So maybe there's something not quite right. I'm not knowledgeable enough about it. As long as it drives, I've got no warnings, and it feels good, I'll be happy. And maybe that's something I'll tackle at a later date to actually find out, hang on, how much of a difference is this supposed to make?
I mean, it was quite a novel thing back in the mid-90s.
Oh, big time.
EDC. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of off the top of my head think of, possibly Porsche or somebody like that.
I honestly can't, don't claim to have an in-depth knowledge of other brands, but I honestly cannot. I don't know of another car that had switchable adaptive suspension in, well, that function I think came out in 1994 to have the switchable option.
Somebody will let us know in the comments.
Someone hopefully will know.
Oh, I think you'll find.
Yeah, 23rd of May 1991.
Okay, so which part of the resto has been the most enjoyable so far? So which part of it have you really just enjoyed getting stuck into?
The best part I can remember was when the car was back at my parents', so 18 months ago. And it was a lovely day. Actually, no, I think it was longer than that. I think it might have been during lockdown. It was a lovely day, and I was about to put the subframe back on, so I had an immaculate subframe that I'd had blasted, zinc-coated, then I painted it in Hammerite. The struts looked great because I'd rebuilt them with new bump stops, new rubbers, new springs. The trailing arms were all done, the anti-roll bar, all those bits. And it was a lovely day. It was all laid out on my drive. It was warm. I put it all back on. I thought, this is brilliant. Like, it just looked ace. The car is now here because I've started doing the front half. So I've stripped everything off of it and sent, again, various bits off for blasting, bracketry, roll bar, subframe. They've been zinc coated, I've hammerited them again. The subframe's now back on. So I'm now at a point where I've tackled a little bit of surface corrosion under the body of it as well. And I'm now at a point where I've welded up, I've had Ian kindly welded up wheel arch lining fixings, so that's all sorted because they were corroded. So I now need to get on to rebuilding the front struts. That's the next thing. So I need to order some springs, a few bits from BMW. I've got a couple of bits already, but order some stuff. And then it'll be onto the front calipers, getting those rebuilt. I've got this reseal kit for those. And then really it's just a case of buying lower arms and various other bits and bobs, putting it all together like Lego, and then set of tyres, and then there's various engine bits I want to do. Nothing too major, but I'm just going to, whilst it's a park, 'cause I've got the plenum off, I just want to rebuild or replace all of the vacuum hosing because it just turns to dust, which I think is sometimes why it runs not quite right, because the airflow meter's not giving an accurate reading for what's actually getting into the engine because of vacuum leaks. So a bit of engine work. Need to do the clutch slave because that's leaking.
Yeah, do you want to tell us about the problems we had with your leaky clutch slave and
Yes.
getting it onto this fine Heath Robinson ramp structure here, and one of the problems you had?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the clutch slave first of all. Had a leaky clutch slave. I think it's because the fluid just hasn't been changed regularly enough. A load of grits got into the bottom, made its way down to the clutch slave and scored the bore. So I got a rebuild kit. It was like £4 off auto dock. Rebuilt the clutch slave, worked for a bit. Hey presto, I could drive the car, brilliant. And then it started leaking again. So when we moved the car over here, I had to have it put on the flatbed. He winched it up. But then when we said, we're going to put the car on these ramps, so a bit higher than axle stands, and my clutch slave was still leaking and pressure was going away, and you had to pump it in order to actually get some pressure. We managed to get the car up here, but because I couldn't be too gentle on the clutch, I think what happened is I had to suddenly let the clutch out in order to get the car up, and it spun some wood out the back, because we had blocks of wood, didn't we, to try and give a little bit of clearance. I think it spun some wood out the back and shot across the workshop, and I caught one of my beautiful new fuel lines on the corner of the ramp. So I've got to replace that or replace a section. I'd like to replace the whole thing, but that then involves removing the entire rear subframe again. So we'll see, but you live and learn, don't you? You know, don't drive a car when your clutch lave's knackered.
Yeah. I think it's also fair to say that this is a project that's done on a budget. You don't have huge amounts of expendable cash. It's taken its time because you don't have.
Yeah, I don't have bottomless pockets. I bought the car and I got a loan for it, and I gradually paid that off over 3 years or whatever. So I didn't, I was earning fairly decent money in sales at the time. Not great, but decent. And I was living with parents, so I could afford 328 quid a month or whatever it was. So yeah, it's been done. Don't get me wrong, I like to use the best materials, the best things I can get, but it just takes me a bit of time to save up and try and get those parts as efficiently as I can. So yeah, it's hence it's taken a bit of time. It's just, plus year before last I bought my first flat, got a mortgage, so prior to that, there's been a lot of saving in order to afford that, so this was put on the back burner a little bit really, hence it's been off the road for 5.5, 6 years. This year hopefully is the year.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, so have you outsourced any of the work to any other companies? Obviously you mentioned earlier with a couple of bits, but which are the main parts that you've realised that you need somebody with a bit more expertise to help you with?
So yeah, there are a few bits I outsourced to some people. David Olias really helped me out with a couple of little bits of Classic MD Motors, I think he calls himself, out in Suffolk. He's the UK specialist for E34 M5s. He knows everything. He knows them inside out. He owns a Rosso limited edition. He's just a legend. I try not to disturb him too much and take up his time, but if you need something doing, he's the man. One thing I did outsource actually was the fuel tank. I noticed it was sort of corroding along the seam and expanding, and it was quite, because they're a metal fuel tank, it was quite pitted, and I thought, I best rub it down, see how bad it is, and see if I can do something with it myself, and it was just beyond that state. So, plus the little breather things had snapped off the side. There's like a brake line sort of size breather that comes off the side. So I sent that up to, I can't remember the name of the place, it was up in Newcastle somewhere. Radiator and fuel tank specialist. We'll find it and we'll put it in the description in the video. The guy was brilliant. What they do is they split the tank at the seam, and then they'll cut out any corroded bits, put patches in, and then they do they'll coat it inside and out with kind of like some sort of rubberized lining type of thing in order to preserve the metal and make it last, make it last as long as possible. So yeah, they were really good. It was about 400 quid for that, but it was well worth the money. Because a friend of mine actually, who's got another limited edition, Steve, mentioned that he had his fuel tank replaced, and I think there are some elements with these cars, BMW do support the parts, but like with the fuel tank, I believe he said it was a new old stock one, so it's probably been sitting in a warehouse since 1995, and his has started to corrode and get to that point. So you think, well, I did consider buying a new one from BMW, because I think there are a couple still available. It's like 700-800 quid. So I thought, I'll just do what I can with that. My opinion is very much, if something can be refurbished, do it, because you keep in original bits on the car, even though that might not be as it came out of the factory, but you keep in original bits on the car, you're keeping people in business who do this refurbishment type stuff, and thirdly, it keeps more parts on the shelves for other people in years to come. So that's my way of doing things. I like to, plus it helps me learn. I enjoy that process of that sort of thing. So yeah, your mate Steve Crooks, he is the man. He's like some magical wizard who can do anything on anything. Yeah, I mean, all he did was drilled out, a new seat for me for the suspension line to go in because it was leaking. But had I not found someone who could do that so well, I probably would have thought, time to put some coilovers on it. But which I did consider a long time ago when I first took that valve off and thought, Christ, yeah.
Finally, what are your plans for the car once you finished it?
Enjoy it. because I've been missing it for so many years. Get it on the road, get it out and about, go to all the usual meets. Maybe not Santa Pod because that's gone downhill a little bit in my estimations. But yeah, go to some meets. I had this wacky idea at one point of trying to get as many of these limited edition cars together as possible. I know of about, the thing is, most of them are like this. They're in states of repair or being refurbed, or they're off the road. So I think I know of about, I've got a list of them. I know of about 10 that are still alive and kicking. I'm sure David Olias knows of many more. But I'd love to do like an LE meet somewhere. It'd have to be somewhere fairly central in the UK, but yeah, just get out, enjoy it, take it to some places, because you just don't see them. Like E34s, I think like the E36, they're kind of like the runt of the litter in terms of M cars. You know, everyone's like, oh, E30, E28, oh, E39, E46, but these sort of, they get a little bit forgotten, which is kind of sad, really, because I think they're the last of the true analogue BMs. This M5, yeah, apparently this was the last in Garching, I think it was the last hand-built M car was this. And this has the largest straight six BMW have ever put in the car, 3.8. I think it's 3795cc. Not 100% on that, but I mean, it's the race-derived engine from the M88 in the M1. I mean, like...
It had its origins in the M30, so it was a fine tribute.
Oh yes, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't realise that. But yeah, I think you just don't see them about. I think they're special. Yeah.
I think you're special.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, James.
Sorted.